Hi friends, I'm back filming a video about my favorite books of 2023. The funny thing is I actually ended up with 23 books on this list. I didn't do that on purpose. I just kind of add books as I read them. And when I went to go click on that shelf that I've made on Goodreads, it had 23 books on there, which felt a little bit perfect. So I'm gonna start with number 23 and work my way up through the list. Now, obviously, I have loved every single one of these books. I've read a lot of good books this year, and these are just kind of the ones that had an extra little push and stuck with me. We are gonna go ahead and get started with books number 23 and 22. I'm gonna hold them up at the same time because they both come from one of my favorite authors, Becky Chambers. This is A Psalm for the Wild Built and A Prayer for the Crown Shy. If I'm getting technical, I loved book 2 a little bit more than book 1. I think these are one of those beautiful books in true Becky Chambers style, very reflective, thought-provoking, and comforting at the same time. I really enjoyed getting to know the two main characters in these books. It was slow-paced. You got to really feel the setting. You got to really know the characters, somehow all in a set of novellas. I also just think the covers are beautiful, especially this one. I love the color combination on that. These are at the bottom mainly because I love this author and I could have done with bigger books, but I think what she accomplished in a novella set is incredible. For number 21, I have Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. I am not huge into the mystery, thriller, horror genre, but Grady Hendrix has become an author that I love and trust, surprisingly. I don't think I was expecting it. Last year I read A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, and that was my first story by Grady Hendrix. This is number 2. I don't know if I liked it more or less. It was wild because you could tell it had the same author but was so vastly different. I think the concept is amazing. I love just the way that this brings total IKEA vibes. You get some really fun little inserts here. They get more scary as you go. Yeah, it was a wild ride. There were parts that I had a hard time imagining, and I think that's why it's a little bit lower on this list. Excellent story. Loved it. For number 20, I have one from a new favorite author, Bryony and Roses by T. Kingfisher. This is a short Beauty and the Beast retelling that I listened to through Libro FM on audiobook and really fell in love with the way it was unique. T. Kingfisher has this incredible ability to make things feel so comforting and familiar, and then all of a sudden just take a dark twist and then bring you right back into that comforting and familiar, so you almost are not even aware that the darkness has happened. And I just love that. It was a really good book, and again, I wish we got a little bit more because it was a shorter book. I think it was only like maybe a 6-hour audiobook, if that. So I just wanted a full version of this. And I think I wanted just a little bit more romance than there was. Another audiobook for number 19, I have 6 Crimson Cranes. I had this on my audiobook wish list for a while and hadn't picked it up. I just decided to go for it in October and loved it. I enjoy a good retelling, so I don't know why it took me so long to get to this one. The lore that it built, the way that the first book ended, the relationships that you got to see slowly develop. It didn't feel like anything was rushed, but it didn't feel like it was going too slow, in my opinion. It was just the right amount of anticipation and world building and relationship building. I burned through this audiobook. It was wonderful. Number 18, I have Shadow of the Fox. And this is book number 2 in this series. It is a series about a kitsune who is trying to save a scroll that lets someone have basically a no holds bar wish. And this scroll has been in the wrong hands before and has nearly ended the world. So she's trying to make sure it doesn't end up in the wrong hands this time. She does not quite feel up to the task, but she does, along the way in the first book, kind of get a group of people who are willing to help her, whether or not they know exactly what her task is. And there is a little bit of romance. I read book 1 last year on audiobook and read book 2 this year, towards the beginning of the year, and still really enjoyed it. It ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. A hard decision was made at the end, and I now have book 3. So I hopefully will be reading that in 2024 and finishing this series. I just think it has such adorable characters and really cute love in the midst of a dark potential world-ending event. Number 17, I feel like this one will not probably come as a surprise. Lore Olympus Volume 3. This is a graphic novel with an art style that I cannot help but love. The colors are beautiful. It is a mythological retelling. You will see so many retellings on this TBR because it is definitely something that is firmly in my wheelhouse as a reader. This author started this as a webtoons, I think, has been slowly publishing them. So I have been picking them up as they come out. I love the modern take on this mythology, the way that Hades and Persephone interact. I am interested to see how Persephone's character continues to grow, because there are definitely things that Persephone and Hades do that I don't know how this cutesy, adorable version of them is going to do those things. Like, I just don't believe that Persephone would turn Minth into a mint plant with this version of her. I don't know what's coming or if that happens because I've not read ahead on the webtoons, but I am so invested in this series. I read Jamina, which is book 2 in the Illuminae files, on my Kindle. I wish I had not read it on Kindle, I will tell you that, but this book still was really enjoyable. It has a variety of fonts and page type because it is mainly a story told through audio and text files. In book 2, you're following an event that is happening on a space station after the events of book 1. However, it is a separate set of characters. I'm assuming in book 3, everything will come together. But what I love about this is not only is it a very unique page layout, text format, it's also just a fun sci-fi book where you really are rooting for these characters. You get some like badass moments, you get a little bit of romance, a little bit of love, you have tension, but it's all done in a way that you can really burn through. It's certainly on the lighter fantasy side, and I think it is one of those books that you can pick up as a palate cleanser and still get everything you want out of a sci-fi fantasy book without that weight. And I've always said I love both ends of the spectrum. I love everything in between. And this is one of those lighter books that I just adored and really want to reread. Okay, number 15, I have We Hunt the Flame, another gorgeous cover. I had seen this on a few people's booktube channels over the last year or so. It is about a girl who hunts in a magical forest to try and find food for her village. Everybody thinks the hunter, the world-renowned hunter, is a man, and an assassin who really had to learn the hard way that he can't necessarily say no to his role. The writing style and the uniqueness firmly put it on this list for me. I think it felt like, again, a fantasy novel without feeling like something I'd read before. There were also a few twists and mixing of characters' backstories that I did not see coming, and I really enjoyed reading this. Again, very interested to see how the next book in this goes. I don't know if it's a duology or not, but I will certainly be continuing on in this series. I will say there are times when the scene playing out felt like it kind of just jumped forward, like you were missing a bit of the conversation, and I think that ended up making it a little bit lower than I thought it might be on this list, but still an enjoyable read. I picked up Ninth House. I bought this kind of on a whim. This is one of those booktube books that I had heard so much about, but for whatever reason, didn't feel like I would like it, and so I just never read it. I worry that people are hyping things up so much, and maybe it just won't be for me. But I really wanted to read like a dark academia book, and this one was on sale, so I picked it up. The premise was really good. There are some dark moments that I don't know that I was ready for how dark some of the topics would be in this book, but I loved the concept. Like, the concept in this, so cool. I'm a little bit hesitant still to pick up book 2, and I only say that because I feel like I have not seen a lot of people talking about book 2, and that has me worried that maybe this duology does not finish as strong as it starts. So if you have read book 2, I know it just came out like in the last year, I think. you've read book 2, let me know if it's holds up. I also picked up Winter's Orbit this year. This is another one that I just wasn't sure I would like for some reason and then ended up really liking. So maybe I just need to get that worry totally out of my mind with booktube favorites. I really loved the romance in this. It is sci-fi, but I would say it's more romance than sci-fi. But I really 100% bought into the characters and the way the two characters were moving. I think one of the things that really impressed me about this book is that there was a pretty heavy miscommunication trope, and usually I hate that, but the way it was done really felt like it was true to the character's background. It did not feel like it was just a ploy to make the book go longer or to make sure that this other scene happened. I could really understand why each character would be holding back certain pieces of information. It felt like it was true to the personality that had been set up for that character. That really impressed me because I, again, not usually a huge fan of the miscommunication trope, and so I already had held it pretty high because of the romance factor that I enjoyed. I think that bumped it up just a notch or two. You should be very proud of me for this one because I finished Mistborn Era 1, finally finishing some series. I love Sanderson. I think Sanderson has great writing, fits every fantasy love, but I had held off on this because I have problems and trust issues with finales. Love to start them, worried to finish them. I'd heard some things about the ending of this, and I still think I'm kind of in shock about the ending of this, even though I read it in like August. It was such a twist, and yet still somehow lined up with all the information we had been given. And so that really impressed me that the ending of this could be something I didn't see coming, but still when I thought about it for about 2 seconds, I was like, well, that lines up. It does. And so I was just so spinning in circles and still kind of am. I don't know how I feel about the ending. I am a happy ending girl. I don't necessarily want all my characters to die. I don't need consequences or logical, inevitability of, well, obviously not everybody's going to survive. I don't really need that. When I love my characters, I want them all to live. And so this book had me worried, but I think you have to give it props. It's up here for a reason. I enjoyed this whole series and I was not disappointed. Even if I'm not sure how I felt, I know it wasn't disappointment. I don't know if that's such a glowing, if I feel like maybe that doesn't sound like it should be in spot number 12, but it's epic. It should be in spot number 12. Okay, here I am saying I'm a happy ending girl, but the next book on my list is Grimdark King, Joe Abercrombie's The Blade Itself. I loved this book. I think there's a lot of potential for darkness that we'll see how I feel. But book 1 was fun to read. I am excited to see what happens as these characters kind of go on their journey. From what I understand, it probably won't be happy endings, but I think I can still love it. I did really enjoy book 1. I think the characters were set up well. It was a little bit slow. It had me buying in, and there were a lot of morally gray characters that I find myself wanting to root for. And again, a dangerous potential, but I'm excited to continue to read. Okay, we're getting into the top 10. So these books were high on my list this year. And so obviously, I have another Lore Olympus. I just love these. I think I gush about these in about every other video I put out. So I don't have anything else to add except for that if you like mythology and you are not reading these, please do. Number 9, I have A Gathering of Shadows. This is book 2 in the Shades of Magic series. And I'm just now realizing that I don't have book 3 on this list, even though I read book 3 and enjoyed book 3. I do remember this book has one of the coolest opening scenes that I've seen in a while. There's a badass pirate lady and she comes to play in that beginning scene and I loved it. This series really held up. I felt the same immense love throughout the entire set. I think book 2 has the trials. You also get to see more of both princes in book 2. I feel like they both really came into themselves as characters. They grew up a little bit because they had to. I was just really impressed with this series overall. A lot of these I've let other people borrow because they are books I would recommend. So another Grady Hendrix, this is The Final Girl Support Group. I was really ready to read this, and it is just as wild as the other two, maybe a little bit more wild. You have an unreliable narrator who is very paranoid, and so you spend the whole book with her telling you that everyone's after her, and you are kind of wondering, are they all after you, or are you just making that up in your head? And the way it all kind of comes together at the end was pretty impressive. There were some things about the ending I didn't quite love, but then the very last scene was wonderful. A wonderful, like, stick it to 'em kind of moment. I really enjoyed seeing the backstories of these characters and the way they played into the finale. I've just really been impressed by this author. All right, some of you may give me shit for this one, but Fourth Wing, it's on the list. I know fantasy romance may not be for all of you, but it is for me. I just really loved the dragons. I loved the relationship. I thought it built, it wasn't insta-love, and the characters that you were rooting against really felt good to root against, to hate, and you also got to see some of the fun stuff you love in fantasy, like trials and competitions. So what's there not to love? If you like fantasy romance, this was a good book. Now, I've heard book 2 may not live up. I've also heard it's maybe a 5-book series, so we may be getting another Tamlin. I don't know how this is going to go from here, but I do know that I burned through this, and I'm not going to say it's a guilty pleasure because I just love it. So number 6, this chunk, Empire of Storm by Sarah J. Maas. The last few chapters of this had me like holding my breath. Some of the things that came together, some of the setups for the last few books, I don't even know what to say. I have thought about the ending of this far past when I was reading it. Yeah, I loved it. I was so thrown and so heartbroken and so just like in an uproar at the end of this. I tried to explain it to my boyfriend who has never read any of the books. That's how much I wanted to talk to someone about the ending of this book. Oof, man, this was intense. The next book on my list, it was like an absolute shock to me. It is Enter the Body. It was a free novella. I think it's a novella that I got through Libro's like educator program. It is a like Shakespeare retelling where you meet the girls in Shakespeare who just had tragic endings to like further the story. Some of them died off screen, some of them died on screen. You see them dealing with that trauma. So like the premise is after they die, they go under the stage. So you're under the stage with all of these women who have died tragically, and they start off kind of like keeping to themselves, but they start to hear each other's story, start to rewrite their story, how would they want it to actually finish, and kind of work through some of that trauma. And I loved it. I had went in with no expectations, but I absolutely feel like it was such a powerful story. Again, would definitely recommend. There's a lot of trauma in there, but it was so moving and incredible. Okay, we're into our final 4 books. I let my sister borrow this next one because I want her to enjoy it, and that is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. It is the first T. Kingfisher book that I read, and it was such a wonderful fairy tale. I don't think this one is a retelling, but I could be wrong. But again, there were scenes that were really dark and twisted, but mostly it just had a really lovely fairy tale vibe with just that hint and sprinkling of tragedy and darkness that came together in such a way that I cannot describe how incredible it was to read. It also had a romance that felt like a friendship that might blossom into something, and that was really, really nice. There was a sister dynamic that you got to see. It had a curse, it had a demonic chicken. It really had a lot of amazing things. It had a fairy godmother that really was not great as a fairy godmother. So I think you just got to see a lot of fun tropes done in such a genuine way that it didn't feel silly. Okay, editing Erin here. I realized I totally skipped book number 3 because I have also given it to my sister. But that is Red Sea Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch. This is the second in the Gentleman Bastard series, I think it's called. I love these characters and the story and the things that were done to these characters in book number 2 twisted my heartstrings a bit. So this definitely was in my top list for sure. Book number 2. Again, I know not all of you are Sarah J. Maas fans, but I loved this book. There was a moment where a little fire ember creature has a moment and it kickstarts a series of events that I reread about 5 times and again tried to explain to someone who had never read this book how badass it was. It still lives in my head. It was such an incredible moment. I think I cried. I don't really cry. Books, movies, TV, like I just don't cry in that kind of environment. But this one I was like tearing up. Again, there are fantasy romance aspects, which I really loved. The beginning was a little bit rough with that piece of it, I think, but the fantasy, the epicness that it grew to has it up here at spot number 2. Book number 1 this year, because it was nonstop action. It was things that I did not ever think I would see in a book. It was competition and it was revenge. And it just never stopped. Like I did not want to put the book down, and the action was full on from page 2 to the end. Red Rising. Some of you are rereading all 6 of these books or whatever. I, however, am just picking up book 1. You'll be happy to know I recently finished book 2 and also enjoyed it. But book 1 will forever live in my mind as just like a full-on action movie that did not feel over the top. It just felt like a wild ride. It was amazing. I just can't describe how fast the pace of this book is and how, like, at the end of every chapter I was like, oh my gosh, how can it keep going from here? And then it does. It just keeps moving so far past what you think is gonna happen, and it just keeps going. So this is definitely book number 1 from 2023. I would love to know what some of your top books were for 2023. Give me all the recommendations. I don't really read a lot of new releases, so if there were any 2023 books that came out that I should pick up, please let me know. And I'll see you next time. Bye, friends.